Um, I should, oh, recording is in progress. I should probably introduce myself just for those who don't know. I'm Matt Steinglass. I'm the Europe editor of The Economist, and Francesco has asked me to give a brief introduction to this webinar. I had a look at the paper that Enrico et al. And the team have written, and I think this is a fantastic moment to be taking up this subject. Just in the last couple of weeks at The Economist, the subject of variable geometry, of a looser structure for the EU, these kinds of questions are absolutely at the forefront of so many articles. I feel like I come across them in half the pieces that we're writing on defense, on sovereignty in the economic sphere and in tech, the migration question, which is very hot now with the Migration Pact coming into force, financial union, removing barriers to services, as the Draghi report urges us to, and above all, in the accession question, anything that you're writing about Ukraine, about Montenegro and about Moldova and so forth, all of these are raising these questions around how can the EU be organized in a way that is more pragmatic and open to different architectures to get something done, because the old the one size fits all architecture that was set up initially is no longer fit for purpose. So I think this is very exciting. The couple of questions that came up for me in reading the paper, which is terrific, is partly who do we feel that we're talking to? Which would be helpful for me just to guide further discussions. Are we talking to people inside the Brussels bubble, Syria, and or within the EUI, people who really understand all the deep and philosophical questions that have been dogging the EU for its entire history? Are we talking more to national politicians, more to the European public more broadly? The great challenge is to keep these subjects as exciting and powerful and important as they really are, and not to get lost in complicated philosophical jargon. And from that perspective, I think the word pragmatic in pragmatic federalism is fantastic and will probably catch on very well. So I will leave it there and pass it along to Francesco, who has put together this wonderful conference for us to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Matt. I am also very excited. I'm excited to have a super chair of this webinar. We are talking about the head of the Europe section of the newspaper that I used to call the Bible. And I'm also very proud of you people at Louis. Louis was my alma mater, and you did a great job. Really, probably 21 pages are to be shortened a little bit. An executive summary would do it. And I am also proud to be associated to the European University Institute and to have Carolina and Dana to talk pragmatically about pragmatic federalism. We are 10 days to the conference on the Europe of the future. Together with Antonio and with my colleagues, we are trying to tame this monster. It's a very ambitious and I would say even rideable, sizable effort. And the very point of this effort is to have an impact. So going back to the question that Matt was asking, who are we talking to? I would say it's a very difficult question. We need to probably talk about which are our targets. However, our objective is really to wake up Europe. I would underline, wake up Europe. Europe cannot go on like that. Pragmatic federalism is a very interesting idea, and you team try to operationalize the idea. If I can say just two things that I would like you to a little bit develop out of your proposal is number one, the role that democracy would have into this entire process. How much and how do we want to engage people to promote this sort of partial marriage, let's say unions, no? And number two, the other thing which is very interesting is how the pragmatic federalism will change the role of the European Commission. You mentioned both things, but I believe that these are probably, at least to me, the most innovative and disruptive consequence of the pragmatic federalism that we are probably conceiving. So thank you very much. Matt, you are
Yes,
muted.
I'm muted. Sorry. Terrific. So we should turn it over to the team now, I suppose, right? Enrico, do you want to introduce whoever will be the first person to talk?
Yes, myself. So I will start. No, this is just a joke, just to let's say to break the ice and to say thank you very much for this platform, for your attention, for all your readings. We are here for your feedback, and so I'm really eager to further discuss this topic with you during the final session. Right now, I want you to introduce the thing that produced this position paper. We are a club of five with myself, who I am a postdoc researcher. Then there is Julia Ongari, who is a Lewis PhD in politics, who actually coordinated the team better than me and more than me. So she deserves a sort of special praise. And then we have four very brilliant students from Lewis community: Anna Magnabosco, Greta Del Grosso, Michaela Vitagliano, and Paolo Marcelli. Today, Giulia Ongari will describe in a few words the structure of the paper, and then the ball will pass to the students, so to Greta Del Grosso and Michaela Vitagliano, who will, let's say, tackle some issues, some topics that are at the very core of this, let's say, iridescent concept of pragmatic federalism. So I'm going to give the floor to Julia for, let's say, the overall introduction to the topic. Thank you very much again for your words.
Thank you very much, Enrico, for the introduction. As you mentioned, my name is Giulia Ongari, and I'm a PhD candidate at Lewis. To not steal away time from the very interesting content of the position paper, the way we went about it was essentially in four main stages. The first one being the stage setting part of the paper, where we analyzed the status quo of the European Union. And in this sense, we highlighted the main structural weaknesses, the institutional asymmetry, and other, I call them hampering aspects that are essentially preventing the EU from acting to its full potential, especially in a period that now, with all the crises occurring, does require pretty quick response pace. We then, within this section, also looked at the unexpressed potential, both in terms of existing tools within the treaties that exist but are underutilized, and the role of the Commission in the sense of what could be done in this sense to increase the role of the supranational institution. We then proceeded in the second stage to conceptualize pragmatic federalism by highlighting its main features, essentially defining what it is, and by contrast also what it is not. And taking essentially strategic autonomy as the North Star or the guiding principle for this paradigm. And we also looked at existing examples of pragmatic federalism, both within the EU and also examples outside to provide a bit more context. We then proceeded to look at pragmatic federalism across policy areas, which occur at the crossroad between geoeconomics and geopolitics. And these are namely also extremely relevant topics nowadays, being artificial intelligence, space policy, and defense. Their overlap at the current time also identifies with one of the most recent shifts, if you will, in the EU integration processes. And these three policy areas were also selected because they are deeply structural and at stages even codependent. From then on, we moved to a fourth stage where we drafted the implications. I'm done, and I think I was brief enough to leave the floor to Michaela and Greta. And girls, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you and good afternoon, everyone. If I may, I would like to share with you some slides that we prepared in order to follow up with the discussion and to let you understand better the topics. So, just one sec. Okay. Can you all see it?
Not yet.
Okay.
No?
No?
Yes.
Now
Okay.
it's working.
Okay, so me and my colleague Greta will present today on behalf of the Lewis team, and our paper is entitled, as you already know, Pragmatic Federalism, a multidimensional project for EU reform. So to begin with, in a world of accelerating geopolitical fractures, Europeans find themselves, as Mario Draghi put it just weeks ago, truly alone together. So this paper is our attempt to take that discomfort seriously and to ask, what kind of European Union can actually respond? So as Julia also anticipated, the first part of our presentation covers the structural problems afflicting the current EU and introduces the concept of pragmatic federalism, while the second part examines how this approach plays out across three key strategic sectors, and then we will conclude through two main recommendations. So the EU was built during the era of the liberal international order, but the order is now in serious decline, and the union's governance model, designed of course for a different world, is showing deep structural cracks. The EU today is what scholars call a compound union, so neither a proper international organization nor a federal state. It is a constitutional hybrid with overlapping democratic constituencies, asymmetric competencies, and no single locus of sovereign decision making. So the system's legitimacy was historically built on outputs. It delivered prosperity and peace. But that bargain has run out. Citizens no longer experience Europe through market freedoms, but they experience it through its current gaps, which are the fragmented pandemic response, legally constrained by a treaty article that explicitly bars health harmonization, the asylum governance stitched together from inconsistent secondary legislation, and the near total absence of a coherent European industrial policy. So, at the root of these failures lies what we call the competence deficit. Basically, the principle of conferral has systemically left the EU without authority precisely in the areas where collective action matters the most: defense, taxation, foreign policy, social protection. And when the EU does have shared competencies, the unanimity requirement produces what Sharp diagnosed as joint decision trap. So basically, the outcomes converge at the lowest common denominator. The shift of power toward the European Council has made this not an occasional obstacle, but a permanent feature of EU governance. There is also an embedded asymmetry in the treaties, since negative integration operates under qualified majority voting, while positive integration is subject to unanimity. So Article 6 of the Treaty on Functioning of the EU relegates industry, health, culture to merely supporting competencies, legally barring harmonization. Moreover, the Commission has been progressively sidelined by the European Council over 3 decades. Despite Article 50 of the TEU explicit prohibition on legislative functions for the Council, political conclusions routinely instruct the other institutions, effectively concentrating executive power in the hands of heads of government. Then the Parliament has gained co-legislative powers since Lisbon, but it cannot propose legislation, it cannot dismiss the European Council, and it is excluded from the most consequential decisions. The result is, as we put it in the paper, a co-legislator without a government to hold accountable. And finally, the democratic deficit is not overstated. Four dimensions compound it: the weak electoral accountability, not generally electable European government, key decisions insulated from electoral politics, and a growing gap between EU authority and democratic legitimacy. Critically, abolishing unanimity itself requires unanimity. And yet, here is a striking observation. The treaty framework already contains more tools than have been used. Enhanced cooperation under Article 20 of TEU allows willing member states to build binding common rules using EU solutions, bypassing veto players. As well as the passerelle clauses already permit switching from unanimity to qualified majority voting without any treaty revision. Their non-activation is a political choice, not a legal impossibility. So pragmatic federalism is above all a deliberate choice about how to use the powers the treaties already provide. So this brings us to the concept itself. The whole debate on pragmatic federalism remains clouded by deliberate conceptual ambiguity. That ambiguity is political. The term functions as a broad umbrella, of course, facilitating convergence among diverse Europeanist actors who share an ambition for a more assertive EU, but differ on means and implications. So our aim here is to introduce some analytical clarity. First, what pragmatic federalism is not. It is not a radical ideology. It does not call for a Hamiltonian constitutional moment, a formal separation of powers between national and federal levels, or a United States of Europe as well, as an explicit destination, of course. It does not require treaty change. It is not sovereignty, independence, self-sufficiency, which are also notions incompatible with the EU's fundamental commitments. More positively, we identify four conceptual pillars. First, coalition of the willing. Rather than demanding unanimity, pragmatic federalism allows groups of member states aligned around shared strategic interests to integrate without being blocked by reluctant partners. So non-participating states retain the option to just join later. Second, the bottom-up democratic legitimacy. So opt-in decisions must be grounded in domestic democratic support. This is what actually distinguishes pragmatic federalism from technocratic integration by self. Third, a de facto integration over formal ground redesign, let's say, pragmatic federalism avoids large institutional overhauls. Instead, it relies on concrete political actions that generate federal-like structures even without formal constitutional designation. The ECB and the euro are historical examples since they operate as a de facto federal institutions without being labeled as such. And fourth, a dialectical view of the EU. So pragmatic federalism breaks down the binary between confederation and federation. The EU can operate with intergovernmental logic in some areas and with federal authority in others, and the balance can shift depending on subject matter. That said, of course, the concept carries genuine tensions that must be acknowledged. So the word federalism itself is a political lightning rod that may produce exactly the teleological debates that the word pragmatism is meant to avoid. There is also a timing paradox, since the consensus-building nature of pragmatic coalitions may simply be too slow for the existential and rapid onset crisis the EU now faces. Then, national constitutional courts may resist federalizing moves that lack a formal constituent process, even incremental ones, and perhaps most fundamentally, the democratic question. So previous exercises in pragmatic federalism, such as PESCO, the Euro, ECB, subjected opt-in decisions primarily to member state governments. So in most cases, European citizens, as a demos, were not directly consulted. And this bypassing of the demos sits in tensions with the democratic credentials that the pragmatic federalism actually claims. So pragmatic federalism answer is that the EU need not become a state to be democratic, but it can be a democratic union of democratic states. But whether this is sufficient, and whether pragmatic federalism reinforces or erodes EU democratic legitimacy, remains, of course, generally open. So the real test of any concept is an application, of course. Three key strategic sectors, artificial intelligence, space policy, and defense, offer us precisely this test. They sit at the crossroads of geoeconomics and geopolitics, as Julia already mentioned before. They are deeply interlinked, and they each illustrate both the promise and the limits of pragmatic federalism in practice. But I'll now hand over to my colleague to take us through these three domains. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela, for the introduction. Let's start with the artificial intelligence field. The global AI governance landscape, it's crowded. United States operate through a decentralized agency-based model, while China has opted for a centralized control. The EU's approach is a genuine outlier: central rule setting and delegated national implementation. The adoption of the AI Act is the clearest illustration of pragmatic federalism in action in this domain. Like the GDPR before, the AI Act is not simply consumer protection. It's a claim to regulatory leadership and an attempt to shape global norms by establishing European standards as the benchmark. The institutional centerpiece is the European AI Office, embedded within the Commission, which exercises direct enforcement of the AI Act across all member states. In practice, it operates as a supranational regulator, which is precisely what pragmatic federalism looks like when it works. But AI also reveals some tensions. The final stages of the AI Act negotiations were stalled by Germany, Italy, and France, concerned that strict regulation would undermine European competitiveness. This resistance exemplifies a recurring dynamic, which is integration driven by regulatory momentum rather than consensus. More significantly, the defense sector was explicitly carved out of the AI Act scope. This was a deliberate choice by member states to preserve national autonomy in a domain they consider strategically sovereign. The EU has not abandoned AI in defense, but it's pursuing it through different institutional channels that are still taking shape. The 2025 White Paper on European Defense Readiness 2030 identifies AI as a horizontal technological priority, signaling this potential coordination. Moving to the space policy. Space policy is in many ways the purest laboratory for pragmatic federalism, we could say. Unlike terrestrial policy, the space governance is inherently collective, since no single member state could independently sustain the financial and technical capacities required. And this functional necessity drives integration. The governance architecture has historically been a triangle: member states, the European Union, and the European Space Agency. This triangle has been evolving rapidly under geopolitical pressure. Space has shifted from a scientific domain providing data for earthbound security to a strategic environment in its own right. The constitutional constraint in this field is Article 189 of the TFU. The EU has competence in space, but harmonization of national defense laws is explicitly excluded. Since most space assets are dual use, so both civilian and military, this creates a structural tension that risks paralysis. The proposed EU space law, introduced in June 2025, doesn't rely on Article 189 TFU, but rather on Article 114, which is the internal market provision, to build a unified authorization and supervision framework. Regulatory fragmentation is reframed as a strategic vulnerability, not merely as an administrative inconvenience. This allows legal approximation under a market logic without triggering the defense harmonization prohibition. The March 2026 Donazan draft report reinforces this through mutual recognition of national authorizations and EU space label, building a common regulatory architecture. The startling episode that happened during the Ukrainian conflict makes the strategic stakes concrete. Europe's dependence on a non-EU private actor for critical battlefield communication is precisely the kind of vulnerability that pragmatic federalism, through shared infrastructure and operational interdependence, is designed to close. Moving to our last field, it's the field of defense, where the stakes are the highest and the institutional constraints are the most severe. The common foreign security policy remains fundamentally intergovernmental, since decision-making requires unanimity in the Council. This reflects a deliberate choice by member states that want to retain sovereign control over security and the use of force. The Lisbon Treaty introduced some federalizing elements, notably the Mutual Defense Clause under Article 42.7 TU and the PESCO framework for enhanced defense cooperation. But the unprecedented geopolitical instability of recent years has exposed the limits of these mechanisms. The Readiness 2030 plan signals a paradigm shift. The goal is not a norms race, but coordinated investment increases, consolidation of military demand, and economies of scale to meet the spending requirement that has now increased to 1.2 trillion euros annually. Yet, member states remain deeply reluctant to cede military competence to supranational authorities. This is precisely where pragmatic federalism proposes what we call cluster integration, a third way between pure intergovernmental cooperation and a single European army. So rather than requiring all 27 to move together, cluster integration allows limited, voluntary aggregates of member states to deepen cooperation in specific sectors. The parallel with the Eurozone is significant. The single currency was not the product of a constitutional moment. It emerged incrementally, driven by willing coalitions and producing enduring common institutions. Coalitions of willing countries are already forming in the defense field, such as the one including Germany, Poland, France, the UK, and the Baltic and Nordic states. Our analysis across these three sectors led us to two concrete policy recommendations. The first one is that the European Commission must be rebuilt as the institutional heart of pragmatic federalism, and three specific reforms are essential. First, reduced the college to approximately 15 commissioners under a rotation scheme, which was a reform already mandated by Article 17.5 TU, but politically blocked by the European Council's exploitation of a treaty loophole. Second, genuinely politicize the Commission presidency through a pan-European electoral process that goes beyond the compromise Spitzenkandidaten procedure. Third, establish a clear parliamentary convention. The Commission governs with and for a parliamentary majority, strengthening both its democratic mandate and Parliament's claim to accountability. A more interventionist, democratically grounded Commission is not incompatible with the treaties, but is just a deliberate choice about how to use the powers that the treaties already provide. Our second recommendation is structural. We call it the Union of Unions. Rather than a single integrated European polity, the EU of the future should be understood as an umbrella organization. So a common political platform from which multiple voluntary subunions flourish, each composed of a variable number of member states and supranational institutions, clustered around shared, integrated strategic interests. AI regulation, space operational governance, and defense are already moving in this direction. The task is to make the process deliberate, coherent, and democratically accountable, rather than an ad hoc accumulation of overlapping circles. There's one critical caveat, which is constituted by the enlargement that could transform this model significantly. So as the EU moves toward 30, 35, or even 50 members, the logic of clusters might shift. So territorial or ideologically based subunions could either enrich or fracture the union, but the debate remains open. To conclude, pragmatic federalism is by design a suboptimal solution. It does not resolve the democratic deficit. It does not produce a federal state, but its fundamental premise is the fact that EU is risking paralysis if it waits for an unlikely constitutional transformation. The transformation for today's EU to a federal-oriented union of unions must be guided by a coherent strategic vision. A key federalist principle must be preserved even in this modular pragmatic architecture. The union is one and indivisible, despite being plural and flexible. So all coalition must be channeled towards a common direction, which is a more autonomous, agile, and versatile Europe, one that is, as Draghi put it, capable of being alone together. So thank you for your attention, and we welcome all your questions.
That was fascinating. I don't know, Francesco, did you want me to step back in here for a second here before we open up for questions? I mean, I thought that
No. I'm looking forward to hear from Anna and Carolina.
Okay.
Matt, does that mean we?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Well, we have divided our work. Yeah.
Yeah, we colluded on this. There was major collusion behind the scenes. But we have sort of divided the work. We agree with each other's takeaways. So yeah, you're getting a full, hopefully 15 minutes 15 minutes. We'll try to keep honest here. So first, thank you all for the paper because it's evident a ton of work went into that. I mean, you can't not put in a ton of work considering how many topics you're covering and the fact that you're trying to tackle something which is structural, obviously, and then to also give recommendations, which is probably the hardest part to sound serious about, to be giving recommendations. So there's already a fantastic start there. I had put a note to myself to clear with you that I understood the paper correctly, but considering your presentation, I'll skip that. I believe I did understand it correctly in terms of what you were trying to relay. Now, the feedback you're going to get from me it's a mixed basket. I mean, obviously, you'd be more used to hearing, what is wrong, what can be improved, why this or why that. But remember that for each one of those, there is a lot of stuff that's unmentioned, which is just assumed to be right and assumed to be good. Because obviously that's the type of quality we're working with and that you've produced. But there is still room for improvement. I would definitely. I think it was. I think it was Francesco who already mentioned this. I would definitely agree that the paper needs to be cut down. Maybe not to an executive summary level, because I mean, an executive summary would be useful, of course. But I mean, right now you're sitting at 7,000 words. I think around 4, max 5 will be about enough, because that would make you make some hard decisions on content, because certain parts need to be streamlined. They're taking way too much space, and other parts need to be expanded. And I'll get into that. I hope you understand where I'm going with it. I would ask you to revisit formatting, just, paragraphs of subsection titles. It just gives ease of reading, but those are just structural things that can easily be fixed. It's nothing major. Now, we both, Carolina and I, had a little bit of, we had some questions about the use of certain concepts and the assumptions that are laid within. You go very strong in section 1 into saying that the commission is more or less powerless, right? And I believe that this is set up in contrast to this like intergovernmental dominance model. At the same time, though, at least you need to acknowledge the fact that there is a huge, wave of scholarship out there that are saying that the commission is basically running the show, right? Especially in areas like economic governance, like after the Euro crisis. The commission is not powerless as such. So you should really qualify that statement. Or at least, put a disclaimer that you are aware that there is other scholarship out there and other understandings of where the commission is at. Of course, intergovernmentalism has taken over. There is wide agreement on that, absolutely, but qualify a little bit, because otherwise it seems to, you're doing yourself a disservice. Then on the issue of democratic deficits and top-down democracy, and especially also because Francesco noted that that is a topic which is very important to the project as a whole. So obviously it's a topic that is expected to be focused on. There was some confusion, I think, here, some difficulties. I think those sections are worth revisiting. The idea of European peoples as such, which gives, the impression that you expect a pan-European vote on member states opting into certain pragmatic federalist structures. I don't know if it's a matter of editing. I don't know if it's a matter of that, or if it's an issue with the idea, right? Like I'm allowing both possibilities here. But in a couple, it was repetitive, like it wasn't just once. So it almost read as if you expect that somehow it's just not very certain where you expect this democratic legitimacy to come from. Are we talking about, pan-European elections like the parliament? Are we talking about national elections? Also, there is very heavy talk about the understanding of referendums being the only means for direct control or direct expression of democracy. Treaties, a lot of these pragmatic federalist structures could be, parallel treaty arrangements. They don't have to be within the EU framework, as you note yourself. Treaties, however, need to be ratified by national parliaments. And national parliaments, of course, are an expression of national democracy. So you just need to be very careful, because that in itself is a field with a lot of layers. And if you're going further into that, those really need to be unpacked a lot more carefully. again, maybe it's just a matter of the terminology used, but again, it does not help the argument. It does not come across as strongly as it could have. There is a matter, you introduced the concept of differentiated integration and its relationship with pragmatic federalism. It's difficult, that section, for me personally. I would have thought differentiated integration is perhaps a result of pragmatic federalism being applied, right? Of EU à la carte. You end up with a two-speed Europe, that type of, Enrico, I see you nodding. So yeah. So maybe again, it's about placement, but also differentiated integration is another concept that's been with us for a while. And it's worth, when you engage with it, it would give strength to your argument on pragmatic federalism. Just engage with it better, like put those together in a way that would fluff up the idea on pragmatic federalism. And then we get to, and on this, there was, during your presentations, maybe it was Julia, I don't know if Julia or Michaela, but someone noted a strategic autonomy as the North Star of pragmatic federalism. Please, I mean, that is really interesting. That is not in the paper. That is not in your paper.
I think
but pursue it.
We briefly skimmed over it, but good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, like pursue it. Again, these are concepts that, would help you hook. Maybe if your reader knows more about strategic autonomy, if you describe to them what you're trying to do with pragmatic federalism, they'll understand you a lot better that way. Now, on pragmatic federalism, please explain to us what it is. You go into the manner, this might be the manner of the structure of the writing. I entertain the idea that you want to explain it by saying what it is not. But at the same time, I kind of want to be taken by the hand as a reader and told, you know what? It is a contested field. There is a lot of opinions out there on what pragmatic federalism really is. This is the definition we're working with here, and this is what we're proposing to you. Then explain to me why you think that is better than something else. It's just about the structure and the way that you push your argument, instead of the current, you don't need the fact that pragmatic federalism is aspirational, holistic, or multi-layered and relational and graded. It's that to the audience that I think you're looking for here, it doesn't land. And you need language that lands, and you need a structure that lands. So lead with a clear definition that'll just cut through the fog, and then organize the section around that. Also because, and Carolina, sorry, I'm wrapping this thing up. Also because this then explain to us why it is that you have chosen the examples you have chosen. Now, defense, space, and AI, if you give me a definition of pragmatic federalism that I can then, try to look for in those examples, it would be a lot easier for me to just read through the paper and to connect it. In terms of scale, there is a lot of emphasis in the paper. I started with, asking you to cut back. I think this is maybe a place where you could cut back. These are examples, but they're not maybe leading fields of what you're trying to say. I'm not sure about that. You make that decision yourselves. But as examples, they are not the lead, because by the time you wrap them up and you get to the conclusion and the recommendations, all of a sudden we're back to square one with empowering the commission. I need to remind myself, when did we last talk about the commission? And that was in section 1, right? Because we've been talking about pragmatic federalism and other topics until then. And on that is, so those recommendations are probably the biggest strength of your paper. but you need to expand there. You need to, especially, so on the commission, I think, and Francesco was very, again, like nodding vehemently here earlier during the presentation, I noticed that. I think that looking at the commission as the way to fix the democratic deficit is completely novel. Usually all you get is, European Parliament on that type of stuff. So that is an interesting approach. As far as I'm concerned, it's not something that I have come across. Expand it, work with it more. And on the Union of Unions, on what pragmatic federalism will lead to, that I think is your key point here. What is the long-term outcome of this? What are the risks? Spell them out, talk about them some more. What are your risk mitigation strategies to do this? So, like how does a single market operate in a union of unions when everyone is picking and choosing what they want to do? And is pragmatic federalism ultimately defeatist that will never get back to, this sort of constitutional moment that we're looking for? And I'll shut up there. But look, the point here being, this is about the delivery and the structure, about tinkering with what is where and how much of it you have in order to really drive the point home, but to really, really, I think, reconsider what your priorities are in this paper. Not just, you don't need to show all the work you've done. We all do it. Like we are all guilty of it. So just make those hard decisions is that. And I'll pass to Carolina.
Thank you so much, Anna. It was a great and strong introduction. And also let me please congratulate all the students in the group for delivering this paper. This is a draft. This is the first step, and we have all the conference to also master it and perfect it. So I'm going to maybe be a little bit also more helpful here, because that's how we divided the work. The main critical and constructive part, and now recommendations and suggestions for improvements. But I cannot escape one important, I would say, meta observation that I have from your work, also after reading the very long conference program, Siena conference program. So first of all, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Francesco, to me, your group task is kind of a bridging methodology. So it's for me, it's like a horizontal, and for me and for Anna as well, a horizontal conceptual spine, like a backbone of the whole conference in a way. And it's also reflected in the title of the conference. So what I have to say at the beginning is, like, I would seek in a final product a much more integration into the overall discussion and all the ideas of the other problem-solving groups and of the other plenaries, for example, of the conference. So at the moment, this paper looks a little bit like a kind of standalone constitutional essay, right? Rather than an operational framework for fixing EU effectiveness. Relating to the problems that other people also identified. So keeping this in mind, and also quoting the task that we have in this group, which is to clarify why pragmatic federalism, what concrete mechanism it implies, and when they are politically feasible under the constraints. We would both recommend the following things, and we will send it to you as well. So you don't really have to make large notes now, but rather engage in the discussion with us later. So first of all, you have to shorten this diagnosis that is obviously very right, all the structural constraints, because we know what is wrong. Everybody knows what is wrong. Just summarize the picture. And also let's remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, that many of the structural weaknesses that you point out, like the joint decision trap, etc., democratic deficit, they are the institutional background conditions for all the Pontiniano groups, and also the problems, right? So I can imagine that this will be described in the introduction to the final report. Now, you have to state, as Anna rightly said, state the main thesis of the paper, which is basically that pragmatic federalism is and should be the remedy, right, to these problems. But this remedy is a method. It's not a new policy innovation. It's a method. It's a method of effective and democratic governance. These two components are crucial here, right? And the method that does not require a constitutional overhaul. So you have to define, once again, and we will repeat that, but this is very important from the recommendation point of view. If you want to convince policymakers, you need to make them sure that you are very strongly, kind of defining and standing behind your concepts. So differentiated and related also to other concepts like differentiated integration, coalition of the willing, cluster integration. From reading your paper, I have the impression that the cluster integration is some sort of a mechanism of pragmatic federalism. But then do we make a pragmatic federalism a method of differentiated integration, of which cluster integration is a mechanism? That becomes a little bit too complex. Simplify it. Now, very important issue here. We have to be concrete and we have to be convincing and we have to present something novel as well. So I would encourage you to think about some sort of a roadmap that can be used for various policy areas, and you can call it pragmatic federalism roadmap, right? So you could structure it in the following way. These are just the suggestions. So you first, or whoever wants to work with pragmatic federalism should first identify the strategic bottlenecks that we have, where the EU action is too slow or it requires, some refinements, some revisions. Then think about what sort of coalition of the willing would be willing to step into this field and fix it based on the interest, strategic interest as well. Then third, deploying, you have to think about what exact legal steps or budgetary tools or regulatory tools could be deployed. And then you very nicely described these three areas, but they were like examples. Now we want to go forward with some more innovative, not yet discussed ideas, and we have to bring it up. I mean, me working on democracy and also communication, I would say that the very organic, ontological lack of European communication and education is a policy field to be fixed with pragmatic federalism. For what I would say, this is an example just to give you some inspiration. I would say that European education is a weapon that we are lacking. And that's why people are so prone to disinformation, et cetera, et cetera. We don't even know what is European citizenship and what it gives us. So why not willing member states using the supportive competence in education? Why wouldn't they like to go forward with some elements of, at least minimal systemic minimum level of education for primary schools, secondary schools, about what EU is, what it does, etc. Just to start from that. So that's just an example. Then you have to also mention in your roadmap, how would you like to create incentives to opt in to that area? Why would member states like to or should step in? So funding, shared infrastructure. You could, for example, say that this European education could be an instrument of security policy against the hybrid war, Russian influence, etc. Right? So then, fifth element, very important as well, of the roadmap, adding democratic legitimacy mechanisms. And this is a little bit underdeveloped in your paper at the moment. So try to answer these sort of questions, for example, for each policy option. What minimum democratic procedures should accompany pragmatic federalism steps to avoid, for example, further hollowing out of legitimacy? Second question, are we talking more about more indirect parliamentary, legitimacy tools like parliamentary votes? Or rather, are we talking about very, strong participatory dimension that we would like to introduce? Why yes, why not? And then how this is speaking to another problem-solving group that is very intrinsically linked to what we're doing here, which is the democracy versus efficiency. So you could also try ambitiously to answer the question, how can pragmatic federalism help to work out this trade-off, to avoid this trade-off? And then finally, sequencing and phasing, because the program asks us to reflect a little bit more on when. So another ambitious task, identify some sort of phasing and windows of opportunity that could arise, like, for example, future elections, multi-annual financial framework negotiations, enlargement steps, etc. Could they be obstacles, or could they be windows of opportunity? And as Anna said, very important thing that will show also the maturity of your presentation is acknowledging and mitigating the risks. So just two more observations from me. As I said, the paper should speak to the overall aim and idea of the conference. And I think that what I'm missing from here is also addressing the question of cohesion. Because if you look at the agenda, it largely devotes attention to cohesion policy reform, social infrastructure, demography, for example, backlash against the Green Deal. I think this sort of issues should be also somehow addressed in the paper. Maybe you can briefly articulate what pragmatic federalism means for cohesion, because there's a union of unions, which you very nicely label, risk, locking weaker or smaller states into permanent peripheral status, or rather allowing them to somehow qualify to the better league, let's say. And now that's all in terms of recommendations, and we will send it to you. But I just wanted to make two questions from me at the moment from your presentations. Some of you mentioned that, and this is also in the paper, that pragmatic federalism avoids large institutional overhauls, and this is the advantage of it. But then, if we look at one of your recommendations, which is reducing the size of the Commission, I wonder, and I'm asking very pragmatically, isn't it out of the question, taking into account the member states' opposition, member states motivated by influence and power rationale? Isn't it too big of an overhaul for them? So would it really be compatible with pragmatic federalism logic? And then quite technical, I would say, a question and also a concern. Your section 5 is called Conclusion with 2 Policy Recommendations. But in fact, they are not about policies. They are about polity shape, right? So the structural constitutional aspects, because Union of the Unions as well as the Commission reform are both non-policy related recommendations. So I would encourage you to revise that. I'll shut up here. And once again, apart from all those observations, this is an excellent starting point, and congratulate on doing it in such a short time.
Matt, we have a question from the floor. Roberto Castaldi.
Go ahead, Roberto.
Thanks.
Can you talk? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
yes.
thanks a lot. I enjoyed the paper a lot, so thank you so much. Great work.
Roberto, introduce yourself briefly. You are president.
I'm Roberto Castaldi. I teach political philosophy at the Campus University. I'm the director of Centro Studi Europea, spin-off of the Scuola Sant'Anna and Focus Europe, a media online, and I was Secretary General of the European Federalist Movement in Italy until last week. So my question is about an alternative. Because I enjoyed the paper very much, but I think there was one aspect that was a bit contradictory to the discourse by Draghi, which inspired the paper. Because in his discourse about pragmatic federalism 3 weeks ago, Draghi concluded saying that at the end of the day, the union needs reform. And in a sense, it looked to me that what he was saying about pragmatic federalism is that we need action now to share sovereignty among those member states that are willing to do it in various domains, but that this fact can create the momentum to eventually have also some kind of institutional reform, setting up that political will that will take different shapes. So he was trying to put really together both aspects, federalism, which is the institutional reform, and pragmatism. We are not getting institutional reform now, so let's try to do something to create momentum. This is, in a sense, it was the old Monet ideas. I mean, if you go for European defense, like they tried in 52, then they had to set up a constituent assembly, which they call the ad hoc assembly, to write a constitution. So it seems to me that Draghi is back there. If we get an initiative to share sovereignty on one of these issues, then they will have to take care also of the institutional issue about who decides on those new powers. And I think that this was maybe the element that was not stressed enough in the paper regarding what was the fil rouge in the Draghi speeches, not just the last one, but in the last couple of years, which seemed to me to be the really key element to put together the pragmatism and the federalism, which otherwise is very well explained in your paper, which I really enjoyed very much. And the other point is I don't think that you need to go and talk about every issue and discuss about how pragmatic federalism can work on every issues, for two reasons. If Draghi idea was to have an initiative that can also create momentum, then the initiative has to be on crucial issue of sovereignty. And so the area that you identify looks to me the right one. I may add energy, which also plays a big role in the Draghi report. And because the crisis now is on energy, so that's a window of opportunity for an initiative in that area as well. While regarding what the union can do on all other issues, I don't think this really fit within the framework of pragmatic federalism that Draghi was trying to point out. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Roberto. Julia, did you want to start? Is there somebody in the team who wants to respond to that? I don't know how you guys want to select among you. Or sure.
Yeah. Of course, the lady first. So if Julia want to anticipate me, I will not get offended. In any case, I want to thank you all for the comments and the points that raised. And let me start from the end, and then let me retrieve back the course. I must thank Roberto Castaldi for the comments, because I actually share the same view, the same interpretation. Pragmatic federalism is a suboptional, let's say, solution in the eyes, in the mind of federal thinkers such as Mario Draghi, but not only him, and is conceived as a sort of solution for a Europe that cannot have the great leap forward a fully and full-fledged federal system. So I agree that they are trying to pave the way forward, this destination, assuming that this could be the only solution to have a real, let's say, autonomous and self-aware EU of the, let's say, 21st century. So we will, let's say, insert this part, because I agree that the final destination of the Draghi speech has been somehow sidelined in our paper. So we will add this part, because it's very is very important. Also, energy. Which actually you must know, we at the very beginning we planned to insert this policy area as to provide a sort of more comprehensive picture. But as you have correctly pointed out, the word length, let's say, denied this option. So we decided to focus on some clusters instead of others, just for, let's say, for the sake of clarity. But we will mention energy one or two times throughout the text, as to declare that we are well aware that energy is actually one of the key domains in which pragmatic federalism should produce better results than, let's say, the status quo. On the other, I must admit, and I hope you will not get offended, that the recommendations that you provided, which are brilliant, smart, and I'm sure we will further reflect on it, are nonetheless too much. Actually, I'm quite divided, because on the one side I would like to reframe the paper according to those feedback, but at the same time I recognize that including a sort of roadmap or tackling some aspects of the democratic deficit will completely turn upside down the paper, and I'm not sure that in 10 days we will be able to do that in a very successful way. This is just to be honest. So we have to think it through, and perhaps we will pick some recommendations, discarding others, not because we think that are not worth a reflection, and I promise we will, but just because there are some aspects that are too difficult to tackle in just 10 days. And I believe this is not time for, let's say, more positive or more operative reflections of pragmatic federalism, because its real features are blurred. So we are not in a position of saying by 5 years we will have this kind of pragmatic federalism, by 10 we will have this kind of Europe. So to me, it's more important to cut down the word length, of course, reduce the section number 1. Yes, this is a good idea. Reduce the confusion on the sources of legitimacy. You're right. In my view, actually, pragmatic federalism is not very about democratizing the system, but I can provide more, let's say, more ideas on that. We will clarify also the link between differentiated integration, cluster union, and the very, let's say, the very cornerstone of all this fog, which is pragmatic federalism. We will do. I believe that thanks to another meeting, so thanks to another brainstorming within our group, we can provide a positive definition of pragmatic federalism. This is something that we can actually provide, even though this definition is tentative, it can be contested, but nonetheless, this is a good exercise. And of course, we can do that also in the executive summary. I didn't actually understand if you want to include the executive summary in, let's say, the final version of the paper, or you want to skip it. So please tell me about that. So we will do something, but we cannot do everything you suggested, as to save, let's say, the soul of our collective effort. And this is just, let's say, from my part, is an expression of respect for your work, just to clarify that we are eager to, and we are open to change, but not to transform the existing paper in a completely different shape, because this is, let's say, our view, and we cannot divorce ourselves from our view. But of course, we will do better in this sense. So we will provide a clearer, let's say, interpretation of the topic.
Thanks, Enrico. I mean, you find yourself at the stage that everybody writing a long piece goes through, where the comments come back and you've been told to do 10 other things and cut it in half. It always emerges better at the end, but it's a very difficult stage to be at. I also the most clear recommendations, just as an editor, that came through from me, not as somebody who lacks a lot of the expertise that you guys have in this field, but cutting down the number of examples that you're looking into very tightly and being extremely clear about what the recommendations are that you're making sounds terrific. And there were a couple of points about buried tensions that were made both by Carolina and by Anna that I found extremely interesting, such as the question of whether a union of unions inevitably leads to a dissolution of the kind of collective legal regime that the EU is based on. Sorry, Anna, did you want to say something?
I'll be very brief. I don't mean to push back at all. I understand, Enrico. It's just like Matt just said, it's that stage, and I get that, and we get to be bearers of, bad news. But like I said, we're only talking about the bad news here, whereas, there's 20 pages there of like goodness, right? So let's get that out of the gate first. On recommendations, I think, and I don't mean to speak for Carolina here, but I think that all that was meant is you don't need to paint a picture of 10 years down. You just need to sort of, light bulb, give a little attenzione. There might be a problem here if this goes on, this, and that. Just sort of, if this paper is supposed to inform a discussion, the use of it would be to kind of signal people in the room so that discussion can go on. And then we can take it from there in the room, right? Like we'll expand on it. But that's all that is. So signpost, goalpost on that end, definitely. But yeah, and in terms of space, I think you have so much room for maneuver here, especially, again, the background is assumed and the examples you can really take down and just put them to work for pragmatic federalism or what it is you want to say. And I need to tell you, you have a lot of definitions of pragmatic federalism in the paper. Like you actually do. They're sprinkled around. Collect them and have a think. But you do have positive definitions of pragmatic federalism. Just like make a decision on what you want to push on us and what you want us to work with, mostly. And my last thing, and Carolina might want to say something. Sorry, I'll shut up. Please kill absolutely all references to the Eurozone and the ECB. That is literally what I work. That is my work. There is no, I mean, I can see how there might be parallels, but there are no parallels. There is a very long treaty history and intent behind the Euro and the ECB, etc. There is no pragmatic federalism there to speak of, I think, in the sense that you're trying to convey in the paper. Just let's.
Yes,
Okay.
we will. This is very helpful. Thank you, Anna.
I just want to take maybe 20 seconds. I will subscribe to everything that Anna said, and maybe I was misunderstood when I was referring to a roadmap, because it's not our intention to now push you to create roadmaps for some selected policy areas, just to signpost how building pragmatic federalism methodology for any sort of bottleneck or policy problem that we have in the EU could look like using simple 6 steps. And that would take 1 paragraph, but would show to the readers that you have thought it through, that it's not only a theoretical and constitutional reflection on pragmatic federalism with some illustrations, but actually that you know the toolbox, and also about the phases and the windows of opportunity. Again, as Anna said, it's not about foresight, what can happen after the second budgetary term, whatever, but simply being a little bit brave, because giving recommendations, we as researchers, I think we are a little bit hesitant and I would say restrictive as compared to policy experts from think tanks, because we think, oh my God, we're not sure whether it's okay or not, whether it has been proven or not. Well, we are here to give recommendations. So don't be scared of putting something that might not eventually materialize. But that's the value in your risk taking in this aspect. That's it. Thank you.
Matt, probably we need to wrap up
Yeah.
here.
I understood that. I understood your recommendation of the roadmap in that sense, Carolina. So I hope that came through to everybody. I found this absolutely fascinating. Thanks so much for allowing me to sit here and listen to your back and forth. The discussion, I think, will be extremely intense, and I look forward to seeing the next version of this paper. But I do not envy you the task of incorporating all these recommendations and making it shorter and clearer.
If I can conclude very briefly, I must say that I like very much Union of the Unions. It reminds me a pop song of the late 80s with which I grew up. The Union of the Unions also underlines the potential of this discussion that we are having to really change the nature of the European Union, which is very fascinating. Two very small recommendations. And you are very right, Carolina, that this sort of ambition is crucial to the entire conference, to the entire exercise of the conference on the Europe of the future. I would say number one, let's try to be a little bit blunt, Enrico. Probably slightly less academic and more like think tank, say. Let's try probably to start from the end and to make some blunt, radical suggestion. We do not have to win the Nobel Prize or save the world in just 10 days, but let's try. And number two, probably we can also use some option. No? Say, look, this is the option A, very radical, very blunt. This is the option B, something like that. And by the way, please, I would say, Roberto and Enrico, do not be afraid to disagree with Draghi. Here we are not making the interpretation of what Draghi meant by pragmatic federalism. This is not clear, probably it's not even clear to him. What did he mean by pragmatic federalism? We are talking about the Europe of the future. And to be very honest with you, the generation of Mario Draghi, of Romano Prodi, has got many merits. But now we are talking about the Europe of the future, which will be your Europe, our Europe, and will be quite different from the Europe that these fathers or quasi-fathers conceived for the 20th century. So thank you very much. And see you in
Sorry,
China.
may I ask you just the final question, which is a technical one, but is also well connected to what you have already said. Do you want a sort of radical argument at the very beginning in the form of an executive summarizing the main content of the paper or not?
Well, possibly, Anna, Carolina, I would say yes, as an instinct, look, we are talking about this, but even if I would personally, I would even use the title Union of the Unions as the very title of the entire thing, because it really gives you an idea of, look, we are talking about something completely different. But
Could
this
I
is up
say,
to you, completely up to you.
I agree that you should have that.
Matt?
I'm saying that just realizing it's unstable. Am I back now?
No, Matt, I couldn't hear you.
Have I
We
returned?
couldn't hear you. Try again.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Am I clear now?
Yes.
I was just going to give a full-throated endorsement of the idea of having yesterday participated in a debate trying to get a point across about how the European Union should be reshaped. You cannot underestimate how difficult it is to make recommendations for structural transformation in any sense in the European Union and communicate to the average reader or even the average extremely intelligent member of the Economist staff why that is important or what it means. So like an extremely clear summary would be good.
Thank you so much. Grazie.
Okay, thank you.
Grazie, ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.